Good evening and welcome. However you found your way here tonight, and wherever you happen to be resting as you listen, I am glad you decided to come along. Perhaps you are already settled into bed, with the light turned low and the room gone soft and shadowed around you. Perhaps you are lying awake at the end of a long day, or resting somewhere far from home, in those quiet hours when nearly everyone you know has already fallen asleep. Before we set out, there is one small thing I would love to know. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? If you feel like it, leave a quiet word below to say hello, and tell me which corner of the world you are resting in. There is something comforting in the thought of so many people, scattered right across the globe, all settling down beneath the same slow-turning sky at the very same moment. And if these calm recordings help carry you off to sleep, a gentle like and a quiet subscribe do more to help this small channel keep going than you might think. Tonight, we are going to travel a very long way from your pillow. We are going to drift outward, past the last of the planets you learned as a child, out beyond the little frozen worlds at the far reach of the sun's family, and keep going, into places so remote and so dim that they barely have names. We are going all the way to the edge of the sun's realm, to the very border where its light and its wind and its pull finally give out, and the space between the stars begins. We will start by asking a question that sounds simple and turns out not to be, which is where the solar system actually ends. We will meet a lonely world on a looping path so wide it almost never comes near the sun. We will listen, gently and honestly, to the astronomers who suspect a large hidden planet may be waiting out there in the dark, unseen. We will feel the endless wind that blows outward from the sun and find the shore where it finally slows and stops. We will follow two old travelers launched before many of us were born, that have already crossed out of the sun's bubble and into the space between the stars, still whispering faintly back to us. We will drift through a great cloud of sleeping comets and come at last to the true edge, the place where one star's hold lets go and the next star's begins. There is nothing here you need to hold on to. There is nothing to study, nothing to memorize, and no questions waiting for you at the end. This is not a lesson so much as a long, slow, wandering journey outward through the dark, and you are welcome to follow along with as much or as little of it as you like. If you drift off somewhere in the middle, long before we reach the edge, please do not feel you have missed anything at all. Drifting off is exactly what all of this is for, and it would be the loveliest way to spend the night. So settle in now, as comfortably as you can. Let the pillow take the whole weight of your head. Let your shoulders come down and soften, and let your eyes close whenever they would like to. Take one slow breath in and let it ease all the way out again. And when you are ready, we will slip away from the warm middle of things very gently and begin our long drift toward the edge. Let us begin with a question that seems as though it ought to have a simple answer and does not. Where does the solar system end? You might picture it the way it is often drawn, as a tidy set of rings around the sun, with the planets running along them, and a neat outer edge somewhere past the last of them, like the fence at the far side of a garden. But the real answer is stranger and softer than that, and much more interesting. The solar system does not have one edge. It has several, one folded inside another, and which one you call the true border depends entirely on what you mean by the word. Think of it a little like asking where a city ends. You could say the city ends where the last houses stand. Or you could say it ends where the streetlights stop and the road runs on into the dark. Or you could say it ends much further out, at the last farm that still sends its milk to the city market, out where the fields give way to open country. Each of those answers is true. They just measure different things. The sun's domain is like that too. There is an edge where the last solid worlds thin out. There is another edge, much further, where the sun's wind finally slows and gives up. And there is a third edge, further still, so far that it strains the mind to hold it, where the sun's gravity at last loosens its grip and hands you over to the pull of other stars. 3 edges, at 3 completely different distances, and all of them real. To feel how far apart these edges lie, we need a gentle way of measuring, because ordinary miles quickly become useless out here. The numbers grow so long that they stop meaning anything. So let us use a simpler ruler. Let us take the distance from the earth to the sun, the span you already live inside, and treat that one comfortable step as our unit of measure. The earth sits 1 step from the sun. On that scale, the outermost of the major planets, the deep blue one, drifts around 30 steps out. That already sounds far, and it is. Light itself, which crosses the gap from the sun to your face in about 8 minutes, needs something more like 4 hours to reach that far blue world. And yet, believe me, 30 steps is only the beginning. It is barely out the front door. The edges we are traveling to tonight lie hundreds of steps out, and then thousands, and then, at the very last, something close to 100,000 of those same steps, out where a single step has become so small, you could no longer see the sun as anything but one more star. Just past that far blue planet, 30-odd steps out, we come to the first of our soft borders, a broad ring of small icy worlds. You may have heard of it. It is a wide belt of frozen leftovers, chunks of ice and rock that never gathered themselves into a proper planet, circling the sun out there in the cold and the dark. The little world that many of us grew up calling the 9th planet lives here, along with a whole crowd of its frozen cousins, some almost as large, most far smaller. This belt is real, and we have found many hundreds of the bodies within it, and for a long time you could have been forgiven for thinking of it as the ragged outer fence of the solar system, the place where the worlds finally run out. But it is not the fence. It is more like the edge of the last well-mapped neighborhood. Beyond that belt of ice, the small worlds do not simply stop. They thin out, and they scatter, and they begin to follow stranger and lonelier paths, looping out into a darkness we have only just begun to chart. And past even those, the sun's true influence keeps reaching, in ways you cannot see at all, carried not by worlds, but by wind and by gravity, on and on for distances that make the belt of ice look like a doorstep. So tonight, when we speak of going to the edge, we are not going to that first frozen fence. We are going to slip quietly through it and keep going, out past the last of the mapped worlds and into the long, dim, half-known reaches beyond, toward edges most people never even hear about. That is where the real journey lies. Let us go a little further out and meet the first of the lonely wanderers waiting there. So we drift outward, past the crowded belt of ice, and almost at once the character of the place changes. In the belt, the little frozen worlds keep more or less orderly company, running along on wide, roughly circular tracks, all going the same way around the sun like skaters on a great slow rink. But out beyond, that order begins to break. We come into a region the astronomers call the scattered disk, And the name tells you exactly what it is like. The worlds here have been scattered, flung about, knocked onto tilted and stretched out paths that carry them far above and below the tidy plane of the planets, and then swing them out into the deep dark and back again. They do not keep to neat rings. They wander on long, lopsided loops, spending most of their lives out in the cold, and only rarely dipping back toward the sun. How did they end up so scattered? The likeliest story is a gentle sort of violence, long ago. When the solar system was young, the giant planets were still shifting and settling into their paths, and their gravity is powerful. A small icy world that drifted too near one of those giants would be flung, the way a stone is flung from a sling, hurled onto a wild new orbit that carried it far out into the dark. Most of the scattered worlds we see out there now are, most likely, the survivors of exactly that kind of long-ago flinging, thrown outward by the great planets and left to loop through the cold ever since. They are refugees in a way, exiles from the busy inner solar system, living out their long, slow years far from the warmth that made them. And then, out here, we come to one small world that deserves a quiet moment all its own, because it is one of the loneliest objects we have ever found. Its discoverers named it after a figure from the old stories of the far northern seas, a goddess of the cold ocean deep, and the name fits because this little world lives out in a cold so deep and so far that it is hard to picture. When it was found, more than 20 years ago now, it was the most distant object anyone had ever seen moving around the sun, and even now it remains one of the strangest. Here is what makes it so remarkable. Most of the worlds we know keep paths that are more or less round, staying about the same distance from the sun all the way around. This lonely world does nothing of the kind. Its path is drawn out into a long, thin loop, like an egg stretched almost to breaking. At the near end of that loop, when it comes as close to the sun as it ever does, it is already far, far beyond the belt of ice, something like 70 or 80 of our steps out from the sun. And that is its closest approach. From there, it turns and swings outward, and it keeps going and going out to the far end of its loop, which lies many hundreds of steps from the sun, so distant that from out there, the sun would be no more than a single piercing point of light, bright, but giving no warmth you could ever feel, no bigger to the eye than a nail head held at arm's length. And because its path is so very long, it moves around it with terrible slowness. One full journey around the sun, one single year for this little world, takes something like 11,000 of our years. Let that scale settle over you gently for a moment as you rest. The last time this world was where it is tonight, there were no cities anywhere on Earth, no writing, no farms. People were still living as hunters at the close of the last great ice age. It has been creeping along its lonely loop, silent and patient, through the whole of recorded human history and long before. And it has not yet come round even once since our ancestors first scratched pictures onto cave walls. It spends almost the entire span of that immense year far out in the dark, and only for a brief while. Near the end of the loop we happen to be watching, does it come close enough for us to see it at all? And this lonely world is not entirely alone in its strangeness. In the years since it was found, astronomers have turned up a small handful of other distant bodies that share its peculiar habit, worlds whose looping paths never bring them anywhere near the giant planets, and yet which have somehow been drawn out onto long, stretched orbits all the same. There are not many of them, only a scattered few, and each one is faint and terribly hard to find, glimpsed briefly near the close end of its long loop, and then lost again into the dark for thousands of years. But together they form a small, strange class of their own, the detached ones, worlds set adrift on lonely orbits by some hand we cannot clearly see. And it is precisely that shared strangeness, that little family of far-flung loops, all seeming to need some explanation, that has set a few astronomers wondering hardest of all. That closeness is the puzzle. This world never comes anywhere near the giant planets. It stays too far out for their gravity to have flung it onto such a path. And that is strange because flinging, as we said, is the usual way a world ends up on a stretched out loop like this. So how did it get there? Something must have pulled it, long ago, onto this lonely orbit. Something whose gravity reached it far beyond the giants. And nobody is entirely sure what. Perhaps it was a passing star that drifted near the young sun and tugged it outward. Perhaps it was the crowd of stars the sun was born among, jostling close in those first days before they all drifted apart. Or perhaps, some quietly wonder, it was pulled by something still out there, something we have not yet found. And that last thought carries us to the strangest and most uncertain part of our whole journey, the hunt for a world that may or may not exist at all. Now I want to tell you about one of the most intriguing ideas in astronomy today, and I want to tell it carefully, because it is very easy to tell it badly. You may have heard whispers of it. The idea is that there might be a large planet, a real and substantial world, hiding in the deep dark far beyond the ones we know, unseen to this day. It even has a name, a plain and placeholder sort of name, given to it before anyone had found it, and perhaps before anyone ever will. But I want to be honest with you from the very first breath, because honesty is the whole point here. No such planet has been found. Not glimpsed, not photographed, not confirmed. It is not a discovery. It is a suspicion, an educated guess, drawn not from seeing the thing itself, but from a curious pattern in the way other, smaller things are moving. So let us walk through it slowly and hold it lightly, the way you would hold a thought that might well turn out to be wrong. Here is where the suspicion comes from. Out beyond the belt of ice, in that scattered region we just visited, there are a handful of small, distant worlds on very long, very stretched out loops. And when a few astronomers looked carefully at those loops, they noticed something they did not expect. The loops seemed to lean the same way, rather than pointing off in every random direction, as you might expect a scattered handful of paths to do. Several of the most distant ones appeared to be tilted and turned in roughly the same direction, as though they were all being gently combed to one side, all leaning together like wheat in a field under a steady wind. And that made these astronomers ask a natural question. What could be doing the combing? What could be quietly herding all these far-flung little worlds to lean the same way? One answer, and it is only one, is that there is something large out there, far beyond them, whose gravity has been slowly shepherding them into that leaning pattern over long ages. Run the idea forward, and you can even guess at the shepherd. To tug all those distant worlds into line, it would need to be a good deal heavier than the Earth, perhaps something like 5 to 10 times our planet's weight, a genuine world, though smaller than the great giants. And it would have to be very far out indeed, hundreds of our steps from the sun, on its own immense loop that might take it something like 10 or 20,000 years to travel once around. Out there, it would be terribly faint. A world that far from the sun catches almost no light to reflect back to us. So even if it is real, it would show up in our telescopes as the very dimmest of moving specks, desperately hard to pick out against the crowd of background stars. Which is why, the idea goes, we might simply not have found it yet. It is a beautiful, tidy story, and it might be true. But I have to tell you, just as plainly, all the reasons it might not be. First, the pattern itself is built on a small number of worlds. When you are working with only a handful of objects, it is genuinely hard to know whether the leaning you see is a real feature of the universe or just an accident of the few you happen to have found. Toss a small handful of pebbles, and they may seem to line up by pure chance. Second, and this is important, there is a real worry that the pattern is partly a trick of how we search. We do not scan the whole sky evenly. We look hardest where it is easiest to look, and we tend to find distant worlds in the patches of sky and the times of year when we happen to be looking. So it is possible that the leaning we see is at least partly a shadow of our own searching habits, a pattern in where we pointed the telescope rather than a pattern in the heavens. As newer surveys sweep the sky more evenly, some of the apparent leaning has softened, and some careful studies have found the distant worlds looking more ordinary and more evenly spread than the hidden planet idea would suggest. So where does that leave us tonight? It leaves us in a genuinely open and honest place, which is the most interesting place of all. There are thoughtful, serious astronomers who believe a hidden world is the best explanation for what they see, and who speak of it with real confidence. And there are other thoughtful, serious astronomers who suspect the whole pattern will melt away as we gather more data, the way the imagined patterns on other worlds have melted away before. Both groups are doing good and careful science. Neither can yet prove the other wrong. It is worth remembering, gently, that we have been here before. More than once in the history of astronomy, someone has studied a small wobble or an odd pattern in the movements of the heavens, concluded that an unseen planet must be tugging at things, and gone looking for it, with great confidence and elaborate predictions. Sometimes that reasoning has been gloriously right, and a true new world has been found close to where the numbers said it should be. But other times the predicted planet was never there at all, and the odd pattern turned out to have some other cause entirely, or to be no real pattern in the first place. So a hidden world inferred from the motions of other things is a perfectly respectable idea, one that has paid off handsomely before. But it is also exactly the kind of idea that has sometimes led careful people astray. That double history is worth holding in mind. It is a reason neither to dismiss the hidden planet, nor to believe in it too quickly, but only to wait, patiently, for the one thing that would truly settle the matter, which is to actually see it, or else to search the whole sky thoroughly and find nothing at all. And the wonderful thing is that this is a question that may actually be settled, and perhaps soon. A powerful new telescope has lately begun sweeping the southern sky night after night, drinking in the faintest points of light. And if a real planet is drifting out there, this patient nightly search has a fair chance of catching it in the coming years. So we may, within the lifetime of someone listening tonight, either see the hidden world swim at last into view, or watch the whole idea quietly fade. Either way would be a fine thing to learn. For now, all I can honestly tell you is that the door is open, the question is unanswered, and the dark beyond the known worlds may hold a large hidden planet, or may hold nothing of the kind. We simply do not yet know, and there is a strange calm in being able to say so. Let us leave the uncertain hunt for a moment and turn to something we know a great deal about, something that is quietly happening all around you, right now, and has been every second of your life. The sun is not only pouring out light, it is also blowing. All the time, in every direction at once, the sun breathes out a thin, steady stream of tiny particles, a constant outward flow that never stops. It streams past the Earth. It streams past all the planets. It races on, out and out, filling the whole space around the sun the way the smell of baking fills a house. Astronomers call this endless outward breath the solar wind, and it is one of the most important things about our whole corner of space, though almost no one ever feels it or thinks about it. Picture it gently. Deep in the sun's blazing outer layers, the heat is so fierce that the outermost wisps of the sun are torn loose and flung away, streaming off into space faster than the sun's own gravity can hold them back. This is not a hurricane in any ordinary sense. The wind is unbelievably thin, far thinner than the emptiest emptiness we can make in a laboratory, so sparse that only a few tiny particles drift through each little pocket of space. But it never stops, and it moves at a speed that is hard to hold in the mind, something like 1,000,000 miles in a single hour, streaming outward day and night, year after year, for the whole long life of the sun. It is a wind you could never lean into or feel on your skin, and yet it fills a region wider than all the planets put together. This ceaseless wind does something rather beautiful. As it blows outward in every direction, it carves out a great rounded space around the sun and all its worlds, a huge invisible bubble blown into the thin gas that drifts between the stars. Because you must understand that the space between the stars is not perfectly empty. It is very nearly empty, thinner than anything we know, but it is threaded through with faint wisps of gas and specks of dust, drifting slowly through the galaxy. The sun, blowing its steady wind outward, holds that thin between the stars gas back, pushing it away, clearing a space, keeping it out. And so we live inside a bubble, all of us, a great rounded region swept clean by the sun's own breath, with the sun near the middle and all the planets, including the one you are lying on, tucked safely inside. This bubble even has a name. It is called the heliosphere, which means, more or less, the sphere of the sun, the region where the sun's wind rules. There is one more thing the wind carries with it as it blows, though you could never see it, and it is worth a quiet mention. The sun has a magnetism about it, an invisible field of the same kind that turns the needle of a compass here on Earth, and as the wind streams outward, it drags a thread of that magnetism along with it, out past all the planets and on toward the edge. Because the sun slowly turns as it blows, this thread does not run straight, but winds outward in a long, lazy spiral, wrapping round and round like the groove on an old record, or the pattern the water makes from a spinning garden sprinkler. So the bubble is not only filled with the sun's breath, it is threaded through, everywhere, with a faint, spiraling web of the sun's own magnetism, carried outward on the wind. It is one more part of the sun that reaches far, far beyond the sun itself. And the bubble matters more than you might guess, because it is a shelter. Out in the wider galaxy, between the stars, there flies a constant sleet of tiny particles moving at savage speeds, flung out by exploding stars and other violent events far away. This sleet, this rain of fast particles from deep space, is harmful stuff, the kind of thing that can damage living cells and scramble delicate machines. But the sun's bubble holds much of it back. The outward pressure of the solar wind pushes against that incoming sleet and turns a great deal of it aside, so that far less of it ever reaches the planets inside. We live, in a real sense, inside a soft protective shell of our own star's making, sheltered from the harsher weather of the galaxy beyond. Every creature that has ever lived on Earth has lived its whole life within this shell, bathed all the while in the sun's outflowing wind, sheltered by it without ever knowing it was there. For a long time, no one even suspected the wind was there. You cannot see it or feel it after all. The first real hint came, of all places, from comets. People had noticed for centuries that when a comet swings near the sun and grows its glowing tail, that tail always points away from the sun, streaming off to the far side no matter which way the comet itself happens to be moving, as though something were forever blowing it back. And in time, astronomers understood what that something was. It was this, the steady outward wind of the sun, pushing gently but ceaselessly on the fine dust and gas of the comet, combing its tail always outward, away from the light. So the comets had been showing us the wind all along, holding up their long pale tails like flags in a breeze we could not feel. If only we had known how to read them. The wind is not perfectly steady either. The sun has its moods. Now and then it flares and storms and flings out great gusts and clouds of particles far stronger than the usual breeze. When one of those gusts sweeps past the earth, it can stir up the shimmering lights that dance over the far north and the far south, those slow curtains of green and red glow that people travel across the world to see. Those lights are the solar wind, in a sense, made visible. The sun's distant breath brushing against the top of our air and setting it aglow. So the wind is not some dry abstraction. It touches your life in quiet ways, in the beauty of the polar lights, and in the steady, unseen shelter it has given every living thing since life began. And it reaches far, far past the planets, out to a border most people have never heard of, a border where the wind finally loses its long race. That border is where we are going next, so let us ride the solar wind outward, all the way to the edge of the bubble, and find the place where the sun's long breath finally gives out. This is one of the real edges we spoke of at the start, the second of our three borders, and it lies far beyond the last of the mapped worlds, something like 120 of our steps from the sun, 4 times further out than the last great planet. To get there in a fast spacecraft takes decades, and when you arrive, there is no wall, no line, nothing you could photograph. But there is a real change, a genuine frontier in the thin stuff of space, and it happens in stages, one shore inside another. The first thing that happens, as the wind races outward, is that it begins to slow. For most of its long journey, the solar wind blows outward faster than the ripples can travel through it, streaming along at that steady 1,000,000 miles an hour or so. But out at the edge of the bubble, it finally runs up against the thin gas of the wider galaxy, the gas it has been pushing back all this time. And that gas pushes back, and at a certain distance the wind can no longer plough forward at full speed. It slows suddenly and sharply, the way a fast river slows and piles up when it spreads into a broad, still lake. This sudden slowing has a name. It is called the termination shock, and it is the first sign that you are reaching the outer shore. The wind is still there beyond it, but it is slower now, and hotter, and more crowded. piling up and turning turbulent as it feels the pressure of the galaxy ahead. Beyond that first shock, the slowed and crowded wind drifts on a little further, sluggish now, into a strange and turbulent border region, a kind of frothing shoreline where the sun's wind and the galaxy's gas meet and mingle and press against each other. And then, at last, you reach the true outer skin of the bubble, the real boundary, the place where the sun's wind finally stops altogether and can push no further. This outermost boundary has a name too. It is called the heliopause, and it is, in the fullest sense, the edge of the sun's own domain. Inside it, the space around you is filled with the sun's breath. The particles that streamed out from our own star cross it, and you are in the gas of the galaxy, the thin cold stuff that belongs to the wider Milky Way and drifts between the stars. It is the shore of the sun's bubble, the last boundary of the region the sun's wind commands, and beyond it, in one real and definite sense, you have left the solar system and entered the space between the stars. I find it a curiously moving thing to picture, this quiet outer shore. There is no fanfare there, no landmark, nothing to see. If you were somehow floating at that boundary, you would notice nothing with your eyes at all. The sun would still hang behind you, a single brilliant point, far too distant to warm you, no longer a disk, but just the brightest star in the sky. Ahead of you would be the same scattering of far-off stars, unchanged. And yet you would be crossing one of the most meaningful thresholds in all of space, passing out of the region ruled by your own star and into the common space of the galaxy. It is a border drawn not in stone or in light, but in the faintest change in the character of the near nothing around you, a change so subtle that we only know exactly where it lies because we have sent things across it and felt them pass through. There is a shape to this bubble too, and it is not the perfect round ball you might picture. The whole sun, with all its planets, is not sitting still. It is sailing through the galaxy, drifting along on its own slow orbit around the distant center of the Milky Way, and as it goes, it presses forward into the thin gas of interstellar space ahead of it, and so the bubble is pushed into a shape more like a raindrop, or the head and long streaming tail of a comet, with a rounded front where it plows into the gas ahead, and a drawn-out tail trailing away behind in the direction we have come from. The travelers we are about to meet crossed out through the rounded front of the bubble, the leading edge, where the wall is closest in. Out the back, down the long tail, the edge lies much further away, and we understand it far less well. So the sun's shelter is not a tidy sphere, but a great soft-nosed, long-tailed thing, forever pressing forward through the galaxy, its shape carved by its own quiet motion, and the whole of it breathes. When the sun grows more active and blows harder, the bubble swells outward, pushing its edge further into space. When the sun quiets, the bubble eases back inward, and the edge draws a little nearer. So the boundary is not fixed in place like a coastline on a map. It shifts slowly in and out over the years, breathing gently with the moods of the sun, sometimes reaching a little further into the dark, sometimes drawing softly back. Because we have, in fact, done that. This is not a border we have only imagined or calculated. We have reached it. We have sent machines all the way out to that far shore, and they have crossed it, and they have told us the moment they did. 2 travelers, launched long ago, have already sailed out through the termination shock and drifted through the frothing border region and passed out through the heliopause into the space between the stars and live to send word back. They are the most distant things our species has ever made, and they are still out there tonight, still faintly speaking to us from beyond the edge of the sun's bubble. Let me tell you about them, because their story is one of the finest and quietest things we have ever done. Almost 50 years ago now, in the same handful of months, we launched 2 spacecraft outward from the Earth, one shortly after the other, a matched pair of travelers built to visit the giant outer planets. They were not large. Each one is something like the size of a small car, a modest body wrapped in gold-colored insulation, with a great dish antenna held out to speak back toward home, and a long, slender boom carrying instruments away from the body. They were clever for their day, but you carry more computing power in your pocket tonight than either of them was ever given. And with those simple, sturdy machines, we did something remarkable. We sent them on a grand tour of the outer worlds, and then out and out and out, past every planet, past every border, until they crossed clean out of the sun's bubble and became the first things we ever built to reach the space between the stars. Both of them were launched in the year 1977, in the late summer of that year, only a couple of weeks apart. The 2 of them are usually called simply the first and the second of their kind, though in one of those small quirks that history enjoys, the one we call the first was actually launched second, and, being sent on a faster path, overtook its twin along the way and has led the race ever since. That leading traveler swept past the great ring planet and its huge banded neighbor, sending home the first close portraits of those worlds and their moons that anyone had ever seen. And then it turned its nose outward and began the long, silent climb toward the edge. Its twin took a slower and grander route and became the only craft ever to fly past all 4 of the giant outer planets, one after another, before it too turned outward for the long haul into the dark. And they kept going. Year after year, decade after decade, they climbed away from the sun, growing colder and more distant and more alone, their signals growing fainter, their old instruments slowly falling quiet one by one to save the last of their dwindling power. And then, in the year 2012, the leading traveler did something no machine had ever done. It crossed the heliopause. It sailed out through the last skin of the sun's bubble and passed into the gas of the galaxy beyond, and its instruments felt the change, and it told us. For the first time in all of history, something made by human hands had left the region ruled by our own star and entered the space between the stars. 6 years later, in 2018, its slower twin followed it across that same far boundary, out through the heliopause into the interstellar dark, at a slightly different spot on the great bubble's skin, confirming what its sibling had found and adding new detail besides. It is worth pausing to feel what that crossing was actually like, because there was no wall to strike, no line to see. What the travelers noticed was a change in the near-nothing around them. For years, as they climbed outward, they had been swimming through the sun's own wind, that thin, outrushing stream of particles from home. And then, quite sharply, that stream fell away, dropping almost to nothing, while at the same time a different kind of particle, the fast sleet that comes from the wider galaxy, rose up all around them, suddenly far more plentiful than before. The sun's breath had ended, and the galaxy's weather had begun. Along with that, the faint magnetism around them shifted, turning from the sun's own spiraling thread to the different lay of the field that belongs to the space between the stars. Those quiet changes, read from far away in the faint signals creeping home, were how we knew the travelers had crossed. And one of them carried an instrument that could, in a manner of speaking, listen. When the thin gas of interstellar space is stirred, it hums very faintly, at a pitch far too high and too soft for any ear, but real all the same. A gentle ringing in the near emptiness. The traveller out beyond the edge caught that ringing and sent it home. And when it was slowed down into sounds we could hear, it was a thin, steady, rising whistle, the quiet song of the gas between the stars. It is, I think, one of the faintest and loneliest sounds ever gathered, drifting in from beyond the edge of everything the sun commands. They are still out there tonight, both of them, still moving outward, still, faintly, speaking. The leading one is now so far away that this is worth pausing over. Its radio signals, which travel at the speed of light, the fastest thing there is, now take the better part of a whole day to reach us. Think of that gently. We send a message out to it, and light itself, racing the whole way, needs almost a full day to carry that message across the gap, and almost a full day again to bring the answer home. It is drifting so far out that later this very year it will pass a quiet milestone, becoming the first thing we ever made to sit a full day of light travel away from home. And still, across all that distance, its faint old voice comes whispering back, gathered in by the great dish antennas we keep pointed out into the dark, growing weaker every year as its little nuclear heart slowly cools. Before very long, sometime in the coming years, the last of their power will fade, and they will fall silent for good, and drift on forever, mute and cold, still moving outward through the galaxy long after we have stopped being able to hear them. But here is the part I most wanted to bring you to. Each of these two travelers carries something aboard, fixed to its side, meant for no one on Earth at all. Each one carries a record, a golden disc, and on that disc is a kind of message in a bottle, cast out into the ocean of the stars. Long ago, before they launched, a small group of people gathered together. The sounds and images they thought might say something true about what we are, and they pressed them onto these two golden records, one for each traveller. There are greetings spoken in many of the languages of the earth. There is the sound of rain, and of wind and of surf breaking on a shore. There is the call of a whale, and the cry of a bird, and a human heartbeat, and laughter. There is music, gathered from all over the world, and there are simple pictures of who we are and where we live. No one truly expects anyone to find them. The chance that either record will ever be seen by another mind is almost nothing, and even if it were found, it would likely be in a future so far off that our whole world is long forgotten. But that was never quite the point. The point was the making of it, the choosing, the quiet act of a young and fragile species deciding what it would say for itself, and sending that word out into the dark on the side of two small machines. And so, tonight, out beyond the edge of the sun's bubble, in the true dark between the stars, two golden records are drifting outward, carrying the sound of rain and a heartbeat and a hello, on a journey that will outlast every one of us, and every city, and quite possibly the whole of human memory. There is something in that I find very peaceful to rest beside. Those two travelers are the most famous of our outward-bound machines, but they are not the only ones. There is a small, quiet fleet of them out there now, a handful of craft that we sent to the outer worlds over the years, and that, their work long finished, are all drifting away from the sun forever, each on its own path never to return. And two of them, older even than the golden record travelers, deserve a gentle word tonight, because they went first, and because they have gone silent. And there is something tender in the thought of them still out there, no longer able to speak. These two were launched a few years earlier, in the very early 1970s, and they were the true pioneers of the outer solar system, the first craft ever to make the crossing through the belt of rubble beyond the red planet and go on to visit the great giant worlds. Before them, no machine had ever ventured that far out, and no one was entirely sure the journey could even be survived. They proved it could. The first of the pair became the first thing we ever built to fly past the largest planet, sending home the first close look at that banded giant and its storms. The second went on to become the first ever to visit the great ringed world, threading past it and its rings and sending back what it saw. And then, their planets behind them, both of them turned outward and began the long fall into the dark, just as the golden record travelers would later do. But these older two are quiet now. Their power was always more limited, and their voices were always fainter. And one by one, years ago, they slipped beyond our hearing. We lost the steady signal from one of them more than 20 years ago, and from the other longer ago still, back in the middle of the 1990s. There was no drama to it, no failure, nothing broke. They simply drifted too far and grew too faint, and their small power sources slowly cooled, until the day came when we listened and heard nothing, and then listened again and still heard nothing, and understood at last that we would not hear from them again. And yet they did not stop. They are still out there tonight, both of them, still coasting outward through the dark at the same steady speed they have kept for half a century, silent now, and cold, and utterly alone, carrying on toward the edge of the sun's realm and beyond it, with no one to guide them, and no way left to call home. Each of those two silent pioneers carries a small message of its own, as it happens, fixed to its body. A simple engraved plaque rather than a record. A little picture meant to say, to anyone who might ever find it, here is where we live, and here is what we look like. Like the golden records, these plaques will almost certainly never be seen by anyone, but they ride onward, all the same, small quiet signatures drifting out into the galaxy, launched by people, most of whom are no longer living, on machines that can no longer speak. You might wonder where all these travelers are actually headed, out there in the dark. The honest answer is that none of them is aimed at anything in particular. They were sent to visit the planets, not to reach any star, and when their planet work was done, they simply kept going in whatever direction they were pointed, out into the general dark. Each is drifting toward a different quarter of the sky, and each, if you follow its path far enough into the future, will eventually wander somewhere near another star, though near is a generous word out here. Tens of thousands of years from now, one or another of them may pass within a light year or two of some distant sun, which sounds close only against the emptiness of space, and is in truth still a gulf beyond any crossing. They will not stop there or be caught. They will only drift on past and onward, wandering the galaxy for ages with no destination at all, our silent voyagers bound for nowhere in particular, forever. And there is one more traveller worth a passing mention, a younger one, still awake. Not so many years ago, we sent a small, quick craft out to visit that little frozen world at the edge of the belt of ice, the one many of us grew up calling the ninth planet, and to photograph it close for the first time. It did its work beautifully, and then it too turned outward, and it is out there still, beyond the belt now, still healthy, still faintly speaking to us as it climbs toward the edge. In time, it will follow the others across the boundary and into the space between the stars, and it too will one day fall silent and drift on forever. So there is a little procession of them out there now, strung out across the dark at different distances, some still whispering, some long since mute, all of them our own, all of them bound outward on the same one-way road toward the edge and past it, the small scattered vanguard of everything we have ever sent away from home. Now we come to a part of our journey where I must be especially careful and especially honest with you, because we are about to travel to a place that no one has ever seen. Not with any telescope, not with any spacecraft, not directly, not once. And yet nearly every astronomer believes it is really there. Let me explain how that strange situation came to be, because it is a lovely example of how we can come to be quite sure of something we have never laid eyes on. Every so often, out of the deep dark, a comet comes falling toward the sun. You may have seen one yourself, or seen pictures, a faint smudge with a long pale tail, hanging in the night sky for a few weeks before it fades. Some comets come round again and again on regular schedules, and those we understand well enough. But there is another kind, the long visitors that come falling in from truly immense distances, blaze once around the sun, and then go climbing back out, not to return for thousands or tens of thousands or even millions of years, if ever. And when astronomers trace back the paths of these long-fallen comets, following their tracks backward out into the dark to see where they had come from, they found something curious. These comets were not falling in from the flat plane where the planets run. They were coming from all directions at once, from high above and far below, and every side, as though they had dropped in from a great surrounding shell that wraps the whole solar system in every direction, like a cloud enclosing it on all sides. And so, quite a long time ago now, an astronomer worked through what that scattering of comet paths implied and proposed something remarkable. He suggested that the sun must be surrounded far, far out by an immense shell of icy bodies, countless frozen lumps of ice and dust, drifting slowly in the cold and the dark, wrapping the whole solar system in a great round cloud. Most of the time these icy bodies just drift out there, silent and unseen, held in the faintest grip of the distant sun. But now and then, one of them is nudged, perhaps by the far-off tug of a passing star, or by the slow gravity of the galaxy itself, and it comes loose and begins the long, long fall inward, tumbling down toward the sun over thousands of years, until at last it rounds the sun in a blaze of tail and light, and we see it and call it a comet. Every one of those long visiting comets, the idea goes, is a messenger from that far cloud, a single icy body knocked loose from the great surrounding shell and sent falling in where we can finally see it. This cloud, if it is truly there, lies at a distance that dwarfs everything else we have spoken of tonight. The edge of the bubble, where the sun's wind gives out, lies around 120 of our steps from the sun. This cloud of comets is thought to begin far, far beyond that, thousands of steps out, and to reach outward from there to something like 100,000 of our steps, out to a distance that begins at last to be measured not in steps at all, but in the light years we use to measure the gaps between the stars. Its outer reaches may lie a whole light year from the sun, or more, a good part of the way to the nearest other star. It is the largest structure belonging to our Sun, wider by far than anything else in its family, a faint, round shell of sleeping ice enclosing everything, with the Sun and all its worlds no more than a bright speck at the very center. Astronomers often picture this cloud in two gentle parts. Further in, closer to the reach of the giant planets, they imagine a denser inner region, shaped more like a thick disk or a swollen ring, where the icy bodies are somewhat more crowded. And further out, wrapping everything, the true outer cloud, thinner and rounder, a great hollow shell reaching away in every direction toward that light year and beyond. It is from that outer shell, most likely, that the longest traveled comets fall, the ones that blaze once across our skies and then are gone again for tens of thousands of years. Some of the great, bright comets that people have gathered on hillsides to watch across the centuries, the ones that hang in the evening with a long, pale tail and are spoken of for a lifetime afterward, may well be single icy wanderers knocked loose from that far shell, making their one slow visit to the inner light, before turning and climbing back out into the cold for ages more. When you next hear of a bright comet coming, you might think of that. It may be a traveler from the very edge, a messenger from the great cloud, come to round the sun just once in all the long history of the world. But now I must keep my promise to be honest, because this is the crucial thing. We have never seen this cloud. Not one of the icy bodies thought to make it up has ever been directly observed out there in its resting place. It is too far, and each piece is too small and too dark and too cold to show up in any telescope we have. Everything we believe about it, we believe by inference, by reasoning backward from the comets that come falling in. We see the messengers, and from the messengers we deduce the cloud they must have come from, the way you might be sure of a fire you cannot see because of the smoke drifting over the hill. It is very good reasoning, and it fits what we see beautifully, and most astronomers are confident the cloud is really there. But it remains, in the strict and careful sense, a well-founded idea rather than a thing we have looked at. Its exact size, its shape, how many bodies it holds, where precisely it begins and ends, all of that is still sketched in with a soft and uncertain hand. So as we drift through it tonight, in our imagination, through that immense dim shell of sleeping comets, remember gently that we are drifting through something inferred, something reasoned out, a great cloud that we are almost sure surrounds us and have never once seen. And on the far side of it lies the last and strangest border of all. And so we come, at last, to the true edge, the outermost and the deepest of the three we spoke of at the very beginning. Not the edge where the worlds thin out, not the edge where the wind gives up, but the final one, the edge of the sun's very grip, the place where its gravity, that patient invisible hand that has held everything together across all these distances, at last grows too weak to hold and lets go and hands you over to the pull of other stars. This is the real and final border of the sun's kingdom, and it lies further out than anything else we have visited tonight. The sun's gravity, you see, does not end at the bubble, or even at the great cloud of comets. It reaches on and on, growing ever weaker with distance but never quite stopping, until it fades to the barest whisper of a pull. Out at the far reaches of the comet cloud, a light year or more from the sun, its hold has grown so gentle that the icy bodies there are only just barely kept. And a little beyond that, something changes. Out there, the faint distant tug of the sun finally becomes no stronger than the tugs of other stars and of the great slow weight of the galaxy all around. And that is the true edge. It is the place where, if you drifted just a little further, you would find yourself falling not back toward our sun, but away, drawn off by the galaxy or by some other star. It is the outermost fence of everything that belongs to the sun, and it lies somewhere between 1 and 2 light years out, roughly a third or even halfway to the very nearest other star. And how far is that nearest star? Here is a number worth holding gently as you rest, because it tells you, better than anything, how alone each star truly is. The nearest star to our sun, the closest other sun in all the galaxy, is a small, dim red one, far too faint to see with your eyes, and it lies about 4 light years away. 4 light years. Let me try to make that real. A light year is the distance light travels in a whole year, and light is the fastest thing there is, crossing from the sun to your face in about 8 minutes, and reaching that most distant of our travellers only after the better part of a day. Yet to cross to the nearest star, that same light, never slowing, never resting, must travel for more than 4 years. And our fastest spacecraft, the swift machines we have sent out into the dark, move so much slower than light that if one of them were aimed at that nearest star, it would not arrive for something like 70,000 years. 70,000 years to reach the very closest of all our neighbours. That is the true size of the gap between one star and the next. And that nearest star does not travel alone. It belongs to a little family of 3 suns, bound loosely together and drifting through the galaxy as a group. 2 of them are a close-knit pair, not so unlike our own sun in kind, circling one another out there in the dark. And the third, the small dim red one, is the nearest of the 3 to us, keeping a wide and lonely orbit far out around the other 2, so distant from them that it takes a very long time to go once around, and so faint that no human eye could ever catch it without a telescope. It is that small red straggler, the outermost and least of the 3, that happens to sit closest to our own sun, and so wears the title of our nearest neighbour. Even it, the very closest star there is, lies those 4 and more light years off, its light a feeble spark. And after that little family of 3, the next star is further still, and the one beyond that further again, each in its own wide pocket of dark. That is the pattern of the whole galaxy, star after star, each held far apart from all the others, ours among them, sailing alone through the quiet. Rest for a moment in the emptiness of that, softly, because there is a kind of peace in it. Between our sun and its nearest neighbour lie more than 4 light years of almost perfect nothing, dark and cold and still, threaded only with the faintest wisps of thin gas. Our whole solar system, everything we have travelled through tonight, all the planets and the belt of ice and the bubble of wind, and even the great far cloud of comets, all of it together fills only a small part of that gap. If you shrank the distance to the nearest star down to the length of your own arm, the familiar planets would be crowded into a speck smaller than a grain of salt right at your shoulder. And even the far edge of the comet cloud would reach only part-way down toward your elbow. The rest, most of the way to your fingertips, would be empty black. That is how the stars are set in the galaxy, each one alone in its own wide pocket of night, far, far from all the others, holding its own little family of worlds close about it, and reaching out to touch nothing at all. There is something in that solitude that I find oddly comforting rather than lonely, and I hope you might too. Our sun is not crowded or jostled. It sails through the galaxy in a wide, clear space of its own, holding the Earth and all of us gently in the warm middle of it, far from the disturbance of any other star. The nearest one is so remote that its light is only a faint red point, and it neither troubles us nor even reaches us with any warmth at all. We are held, and we are safe, and we are alone in a wide and quiet space, tucked in the deep interior of our own star's calm kingdom, with the true edge of it lying so far away that light itself takes years to reach it. It is a solitary place, the solar system, but a peaceful one. And every so often, out of that great emptiness between the stars, something small comes drifting through, a visitor from another star entirely, and reminds us that the dark beyond the edge is not entirely empty after all. For almost the whole of human history, everything we ever saw in the sky belonged to us. Every planet, every comet, every wandering speck of light was a part of our own sun's family, born here, bound here, circling our own star. But in just the last handful of years, that changed, and we have watched something happen that no one had ever seen before. We have caught, passing through our solar system, small bodies that do not belong to it at all, objects that came in from the space between the stars, swept once through our neighborhood, and went on their way back out into the dark, never to return. Visitors in the truest sense, from other stars. Let me tell you about them, and let me be careful, because there is real and honest uncertainty here about exactly what they are. The first came in the autumn of the year 2017. A survey telescope caught a faint moving speck, and when astronomers measured its path, they realized, with a jolt of surprise, that it was on the wrong kind of orbit entirely. It was not looping around the sun the way everything local does. It was falling through on a path so fast and so open that it could only have come from outside, from interstellar space, and it was already on its way back out. It was the first object from beyond our solar system that we had ever caught in the act of passing through, and there was only a short window to study it before it fled back into the dark. In that short time, it behaved strangely enough to keep us arguing about it to this day. It was small, and it tumbled as it went, and the light it reflected brightened and dimmed so sharply as it turned that many concluded it must be an odd, elongated shape, longer than it was wide, though even that is not certain. It showed no comet's tail of gas and dust, which was odd for a wanderer from the cold, and most puzzling of all, as it left, it seemed to speed up just slightly, more than the sun's gravity alone could explain. Now, that little extra push set off a great deal of excitement and a great deal of loose talk, and I want to steer us gently past the loose talk, because it was strange, and because it was the first of its kind. A few voices wondered aloud whether it might be something made, some artificial thing from another civilization. I want to be plain with you. There is no good evidence for that, and it is not what most astronomers think. Nature makes strange things all the time, and there are perfectly natural explanations for everything that little object did. The gentle extra push, for instance, is just the sort of nudge a comet gets when ice is buried within it, warm near the sun, and puff gently off, giving it a soft shove, even when too little escapes to make a visible tail. The most likely truth is simply that it was a natural object, a splinter of rock or ice from around some other star, flung out into the galaxy long ago and drifting for ages before it happened to pass our way. But I will tell you honestly that its exact nature is still debated, that we did not get to study it long enough to be sure of everything about it, and that some genuine questions about it remain open. Not aliens, but not fully understood either. That is the honest position. The second visitor came just 2 years later, in 2019, and it settled at least one thing, because this one was unmistakably a comet. It came in from interstellar space on the same kind of open, unbound path. Plainly a stranger, but this time it wore a comet's coat, a soft glowing haze and a tail of gas and dust streaming off it as the sun warmed its ices, looking for all the world like the comets born in our own cold outer reaches. And that was quietly reassuring in its way, because it suggested that the icy bodies around other stars are not so different from our own, that comets are comets across the galaxy. We watched it round the sun and climb away, back out into the dark, gone for good. And then, only last year, in the summer of 2025, a third one arrived, caught by a watchful survey telescope as it came falling in, and it too proved to be a comet from beyond, a frozen visitor from another star, wrapped in its own faint haze. By some early reckonings, it may be older than the sun itself, a piece of ice that had been drifting through the galaxy for billions of years before our own sun was even born, only to pass through our small corner of space in our own brief lifetimes. It rounded the sun late in the year and is already climbing away again, back toward the deep dark it came from, and it will not pass this way again. 3 visitors then, in less than a decade, after all those ages of seeing none. And that in itself tells us something rather hopeful. If we have caught 3, just in the few short years since we learned how to look for them, then the space between the stars must be quietly threaded with such wanderers, countless small cold splinters of other worlds drifting through the dark, most of them passing far from any star, unseen and uncounted. We simply never had eyes sharp enough to notice them before. Now we do, and we are only beginning. In the years to come, with keener telescopes sweeping the whole sky each night, we expect to catch more of them, perhaps many more, and to study the next ones more closely and more calmly than we could study the first. And each one we catch is a small piece of another star's family, come briefly into ours, a way of touching the wider galaxy without ever leaving home. What exactly each of them is, where precisely it came from, how it was made, all of that we must work out slowly and carefully, one uncertain visitor at a time. But they are real, and they are out there, and now and then one drifts in through the edge to say a silent hello, and then goes on its way. And so we have come all the way out, as far as there is to go, to the true edge of the sun's realm and the beginning of the space between the stars. Let us pause here for a little while, at the very border of everything that belongs to our sun, and simply rest, and take in where we have travelled, before we begin the long, gentle fall back home toward your pillow. Look back the way we came. From out here, at the edge, the sun is only a star, a bright one, the brightest in this whole quarter of the sky, but a star all the same, giving no warmth you could feel, casting no light you could read by, no different to the eye than 100 other points scattered across the dark, and gathered close around that one bright point, far too small and too faint to pick out from this distance, is everything every planet we know, every ocean and mountain and city, every person who has ever lived, and everyone who ever will. The whole of human history, all our long story of love and loss and wondering, all of it is tucked into the faint glow around that single star, invisible from here, held in a warm little pocket at the center of a kingdom so wide that we have spent this whole night just drifting out to its edge. And around it all, in every direction, lies the quiet dark between the stars, cold and still and clean, reaching on for years of light in every direction before it comes to the next lonely sun. There is a particular kind of peace out here, I think, at the edge, and it is not the peace of emptiness, but the peace of proportion. All the things that press so close and loom so large in an ordinary day, the worries you carried to bed tonight, the tasks left undone, the words you wish you had said differently, all of them belong to that small warm speck around the distant star. And from out here, they are held in their true and gentle size, not made meaningless, never that, just set softly into a larger quiet, the way a single candle looks small and steady and precious against a wide night sky. Everything you love is down there in that speck, and everything that troubles you as well. All of it together, small and safe and shining in the dark. It is worth remembering, too, how new all of this knowing is. For almost the whole of the human story, no one had any idea that the sun blew a wind, or that a great bubble surrounded us, or that a cloud of comets might wrap the solar system round. The edge we have traveled to tonight was mapped only in the last stretch of a single lifetime, by people working patiently with telescopes and radios and small far-flung machines. Your own grandparents were born into a world that did not yet know where the solar system ended, or that anything from another star could ever drift through it. And now we do know, a little, roughly, honestly, with all the soft, uncertain edges we have been careful to keep. It is a young understanding, and an unfinished one, and there is something hopeful in that, in living at a time when the map of the far edge is still being gently drawn. And think for a moment of all the edges we passed to get here. We slipped first through the belt of ice, where the mapped worlds thin away. We drifted on through the scattered dark, past the lonely looping worlds to the shore of the bubble, where the sun's wind at last runs out of breath. We crossed that shore, out past the old travellers, and on through the great dim cloud of sleeping comets. And then, further even than that, we came to the last edge of all, where the sun's gravity finally opens its hand. 3 edges, one folded inside the next, each further out than the one before, would ever let you guess. And the solar system reaching, in the end, so much further than the tidy rings of a schoolroom drawing. It is a wide kingdom, our sun's, wider than almost anyone imagines who has not gone drifting out to look. And it is a soft-edged one, with no walls anywhere, only borders drawn in wind and ice, and the slow letting go of gravity, each fading gently into the next. That, perhaps, is the truest thing we have found tonight, that the edge of the solar system is not a line at all, but a long, quiet fading, out and out, until at last you could not say where our sun's realm ends and the wider galaxy begins. And here is a thought to rest on, as we begin to turn for home. Everything we have travelled through tonight, everything we have found out here, we found out from that one small speck, without ever leaving it. From that warm little world, we mapped the far cloud of comets we have never seen, From there, we reasoned out the wind of the sun and the shape of its bubble. From there, we launched the small machines that have crossed the edge and are whispering back to us even now from beyond it. From there, lying in beds much like yours, people worked out how far the nearest star is and where the sun's grip finally lets go, and caught the faint passing visitors that drift in from other suns. We have never once truly left home, and yet we have come, in our understanding, all the way out here to the edge and looked around. That is a quietly wonderful thing about the kind of creature you are, and it costs you nothing to be proud of it as you drift. Now let us come home softly, the whole long way back past the great dim cloud of sleeping comets, in through the edge of the sun's bubble, past the silent old pioneers and the whispering golden travelers, in past the lonely looping world on its 11,000-year journey, in through the belt of ice, past the great cold giant planets, past the ringed one and the banded one, in and in toward the growing warmth, until the sun swells from a star back into a sun, and there below it is a small blue world turning slowly in the light, and on that world a country, and a town, and a room, and a bed, and you, resting warm and safe in it, right where you have been all along. There is nothing more you need to do now, nowhere you need to be, and nothing left to carry. The edge of the solar system will go on being out there in the dark, exactly as it is, whether or not anyone is thinking of it. The wind still blowing softly outward, the comets still sleeping in their far cloud, the old travelers still drifting on beyond the shore, the nearest star still shining its faint red light across 4 years of empty space, all of it patient, all of it quiet, all of it perfectly content to wait while you sleep. Let your breathing slow, let your thoughts grow dim and far like the sun's seen from the edge, and let the deep calm of all that distance, all that stillness, all that gentle dark carry you the rest of the way down into sleep. Rest now. You are held, and you are home, and all is well. Sleep soundly through the night, here in the warm center of it all, while the stars keep their slow and ancient watch, so very far away.